most therapists would say, of course, I'm person-centered and humanistic, and this is part of
Mhm.
the foundation of which psychotherapy was built on. In IFS, the respect and reverence for the client and their system and for their self, their core self, is kind of the highest regard. It's the kind of, in my regard, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the model. Going Inside is a podcast on a mission to help people heal from trauma and reconnect with their authentic self. Join me, trauma therapist John Clark, for guest interviews, real life therapy sessions, and soothing guided meditations. Whether you're navigating your own trauma, helping others heal from trauma, or simply yearning for a deeper understanding of yourself, Going Inside is your companion on the path to healing and self discovery. Download free guided meditations and apply to work with me one on one at johnclarktherapy.com. Thanks for being here. Let's dive in. All right, I'm excited to introduce my guest for today. Monica is a clinical social work supervisee in Northern Virginia. So she's a clinician, and she reached out to me and had some questions about IFS and applying the model. And so I offered to do some kind of impromptu consultation here to talk about Monica's work and using the model and getting started with it. So that's about as much as we know so far, and we're just going to see where this takes us. So, Monica, thanks for doing this. And yeah, let's start with your first question.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah.
So I actually came across IFS because of you. I was researching about trauma as I work with a lot of clients with trauma, and I came across your podcast. And in this podcast, you were talking so highly about IFS. And I was like, what is IFS about? Um, And I listened to your entire podcast. I can't recall which one it was because I know you have a lot of podcasts about IFS. Um, and I listened to the entire podcast, and you said that IFS has actually transformed your practice, and not only for your clients but for yourself as a clinician. And I was like, "Whoa, I need to learn about this, right?" So I started reading books on IFS, articles on IFS, more and more podcasts, and demos. And I was just, when something clicks, makes sense, I was like, this makes sense. And then I learned about the whole training process until a couple months ago. It was through the lottery, and now they changed. But I've been waiting, I've been applying, nothing. Um, so as I was studying and learning more about it, I was like, why not bring this to my clients, right? And then I came across that question, the ethical question, can I do IFS, an IFS session if I'm not trained? But there was a part of me that felt confident to bring this to the client, is to give them the option. I'm always very honest and transparent about where I am. And if the clients are willing to do what we call IFS session, and I started doing it, and it was just so amazing what I was seeing and how
Yeah.
much clients were being helped by the process. So I think something that I would like to know from you is, what are your thoughts on practicing IFS if you are not officially IFS trained?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and it actually lends itself well to the model itself because the model is a lot about respect and humility.
Mhm.
And when I was a graduate student, I was taught in the mode of Carl Rogers to act like you're not from around here when you're getting to know a client and their life and their inner world. And that means the client is by default the expert in their life, right? They might be lost or depressed or deep in addiction or whatever it is, but the idea that when a client is unconditionally positively regarded and supported, we can lead them to their own answers. So it's not a matter of client is coming to the therapist for answers or for the therapist's answers or the therapist's truth, but we're helping clients access their own truth. So you can see how even those principles of working person-centered, which most therapists would say, of course, I'm person-centered and humanistic, and this is part of
Mhm.
the foundation of which psychotherapy was built on. In IFS, the respect and reverence for the client and their system and for their self, their core self, is kind of the highest regard. It's the kind of, in my regard, in my opinion, the pinnacle of the model. So how do you start to use the model in a way that keeps it safe? Number one, with any model or technique for that matter, I always tell the clinicians at my trauma practice that I supervise is to never forget you're a clinician first. So a
Mhm.
lot of times when we're learning a new model or something like EMDR, for instance, clinicians will get lost or stuck, or the client will start getting activated and they'll be looking down at the model or at the protocol or the handout or the notebook or whatever, trying to find their place or what to do next. They've forgotten that they're a clinician, right? Same thing applies for IFS in my experience. If you go into someone's system with humility and respect, and you also know that you are a relationship expert at the end of the day. Even being new to IFS, you understand relationships. It's the core of what we do as therapists. So imagine for a second that you have two people come into your office, right? And one person is really scared and really frozen. Maybe it's a child, maybe it's really, really young. And the other person in the room is there to help this child, or you're there to help that person help this child. You know exactly what to do, right?
Right.
So that's how I would even kind of visualize what we're doing when we're doing this parts work. A lot of it is getting to know parts, which is kind of the starting point of as you go inside. And let's say a common starting point is getting to know this really critical protector part, this inner critic that most of us have.
Mhm.
And instead of just kind of learning to ignore it or deep breathe or pretend that it's not there or just practice mindfulness of noticing it, what if you were to turn toward it and make it aware of you and get to know it and start some dialogue with that part?
Mhm.
And we call that insight work in IFS. And so what we're doing then is if they can turn toward that part, make it aware of you, and check in. How are you feeling toward that part? So you're always checking for self energy. And if the
Mhm.
client says, "Oh, I'm feeling good or curious," or "I feel sad for the part," oh, sad like empathy, yeah, sad like empathy. Like I can see just how misunderstood this part is. Okay, send that to the part and see what happens. So we're just making it relational. And so two ways that we keep the work safe is number one, we go in with this humility and we always work with protectors first. And number two, we're constantly checking for self energy in the client and in our own systems. But if we go in and the client has a sufficient degree of self energy and they just need a degree of it, not 100%, right? None of us are in it 100%. Um, then that gives me the green light that we can keep moving forward with the work or with this session, right? And we
Yeah.
just want to see what it's like for them to start relating to their parts, and see what it's like for us at the same time to have clients doing this work that is very much between client and their parts and less about um, client and therapists.
Mhm. Wow, that's a great answer. Thank you. It gives me a lot of insight about the work that I already do, but also, wanting to continue to keep searching more knowledge and having more confidence in doing the work. And I love the part that you talk about humility. That's a very I never heard anyone talk about this approach with humility before. So I appreciate that because it's something that's very needed in this work. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That part of the paradigm shift that IFS talks about is it's a non-pathologizing approach, right?
Mhm.
So, if someone is experiencing depression, we would say they have a depressed part, right? Or a part that is carrying depression or whatever it might be. Same thing for our addictive parts, parts that like to drink, parts that like to smoke, whatever it might be. And so it's a very non pathologizing and de shaming stance to take uh, uh, when regarding a client, when regarding humanity. I think that's part of why it really attracts people and it clicks with people so
Yeah.
instinctively as a therapist, because it's such a um, it honors the client, it honors humanity in a way that a lot of models don't. Um, and also, you, as you probably notice for your own clients, when you invite them to get to know that part of them, it just instinctively makes sense, right?
Hmm.
Clients are already talking about themselves in parts, and so we're
Yeah.
just building off of that,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's another reason why it feels so natural just to start doing it, right? And bringing curiosity and bringing basic therapist questions to parts work. There's a
Yeah.
million parts models. IFS is just my favorite. I think the best
Hmm.
and most comprehensive and most respectful. Um, but there's a lot of ways just to start working with parts and getting to know them. For some people, if they learn some Gestalt therapy, they might work with the empty chair technique and say, okay, invite this part to sit in the chair beside you and just create that interaction, or doing some
Right.
psychodrama with it. So there's a lot of ways that therapists are already kind of doing parts work. But in IFS, part of what makes it unique is this insight work where the client is going inside, which might mean closing their eyes, but just having this internal focus and then walking through the 6 F's, which are a crucial part of starting to use the model. And I would recommend having those 6 F's like written down on a piece of paper as you're learning the model, because that's really where you start with any IFS session, in my experience. One
Right.
of the F's that people tend to leave out or skip past is the fleshing out part,
Hmm.
the fleshing out F. And so what that does is, number one, it gives the client an even clearer image or felt sense of what the part is, or who the part is, or what it looks like, or how old is it, where is it located in or around my body. So that's helping them strengthen self to part connection. It's also
Hmm.
helping therapists get a clearer idea of this part. Because what
Right.
happens is all of a sudden we're getting to know this part, and then another one pops in. And
Hmm.
so we can bring similar questions to that other part so that both of us are clear on kind of like who's here, right? And
Hmm.
who's in the room all of a sudden. I always recommend keeping notes during the session. And when you encounter a new part, I would just write it down on a piece of paper
Hmm.
with a big circle around it. And if it helps
Hmm.
you to identify, um, whether it's you think it's a protector part or an exile, then you can certainly do that. But that helps maintain some sort of visual as to who you're working with, and it
Right.
helps the clients too.
Yeah. That was actually a question that I have for you, so I appreciate you touching on
Oh,
that.
nice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think it's still, I'm sorry that I want to go back a little bit to the empathy, to the part that you talked about having this humility, right? How do you work with your own feelings, your empathy levels with the clients? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there was a particular session that I felt myself becoming very emotional about, because it was beautiful to just watch and witness what I was
Hmm.
witnessing. And the client had their eyes closed. And sometimes, I mean, in my own world, sometimes I close my eyes, sometimes, I have my
Uh-huh.
eyes open. And I could feel the tears coming up. And the client did not see it. But then it took me a good few hours for me to sort of recover from that session, but not in a bad way, but in a good way, because it was so beautiful. And I was just like, wow, like she
Yeah.
did not expect that. Nobody expects anything because we never know what's going to happen, right, in an IFS session. So how do you deal with your own feelings and perhaps countertransference, with clients in
Yeah.
IFS sessions?
Well, I was trained psychodynamically, and so we were taught to use words like transference and countertransference, which in IFS terms, it just means a part of me is activated or resonating with one of their parts, with the client's parts.
Right.
We can have positive transference, we can have negative transference, right? In this
Mhm.
case, it sounds like you're experiencing some positive transference, right?
Right.
To back up a second, what I'm constantly doing in my own system and helping the people that I teach do is the felt sense of being in self versus being in a part, right?
Right.
So, for instance, if I have a client that's really stuck in session or really flooded, and I have a part that is having a hard time with that, or
Mhm.
feels the need to rescue or swoop in and save the day, or to
Mhm.
hurry them along, or reassure them that it's going to be okay, that's an agenda, right?
Right.
Parts have an agenda, self does not. Self can simply be with and tune into exactly what's happening without need to change anything or to rescue anyone, right?
Mhm.
So that's the first thing I would do is, as if I were you and I'm in that moment and I'm really resonating with the beautiful work that's happening here, I would just let that happen, and I'd be checking in with my own system, in
Mhm.
particular my somatic sense of what's happening in my body.
Right.
Self tends to feel somatically open, expansive, relaxed. You might have a warmth in your belly, an openness in your chest. You might have tenderness in your face, behind your eyes. And so you might have just been really resonating, in a lot of your own self energy with that client.
Mhm.
You might also at the same time have had parts that were really resonating with the
Yeah.
client or their pain or could relate to it.
Mhm.
Um, Something an IFS therapist might do that most therapists won't do, especially psychodynamic therapists, is name their own parts, right?
Mhm.
So it could be appropriate at some point to say, I had a part that was really resonating with your pain or resonating with that little girl
Mhm.
or whatever. And number one, your part's like that because now they're getting attention, and they're at less
Mhm.
risk of being exiled
Yeah.
by being a therapist. And clients like it too because they see your humility and they see that you have parts and you're demonstrating what it's like to just name them,
Mhm.
right? Let's say a client gives you difficult feedback or is not happy with the way therapy is going, right?
Mhm.
That's another great chance to name your parts, right? If you
Mhm.
have parts that hold different perspectives, like I have a part that is struggling with this, or a part that really wants to um, make sure that I'm doing good therapy here, and another part that um, is it completely understands your feedback and wants to work with you.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Mm.
yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah,
I have another question. Sorry, you're
go
gonna
for it.
cut some parts, right?
Maybe, yeah. For now, we're just gonna keep rolling.
Okay. Okay. So, what is, I know you've been doing IFS for a while. What is something that you have noticed throughout the years doing this work? What is something you would tell a clinician who is just starting with IFS? Something that you learned, throughout many years, and perhaps to make it easier for some folks.
Yeah,
What is something that you would say, go do this or don't do this? Yeah, I'm curious about that.
it's a great question. You're really spoiling me with questions here, which I love.
I can't prepare.
It's it's fun being on the other side of the microphone. I have to admit, out of all the folks I've interviewed and the demos I've done, just being on the other side is fun.
Right.
What I would say, and this is something that Frank Anderson, who's well known in the IFS world, and I did some training with in Sedona, um, he urged everyone at this training to go slower than you think you should. And
Mm,
I think that's absolutely true. And so something I've learned in part from through my errors in
mhm,
IFS work is going too fast.
mm,
99% of what I do is trauma work and working with trauma clients. And so a lot of times for trauma clients in particular, they have parts that have a high degree of urgency about getting better and about healing.
yeah.
Understandably so. And you think about it from an exile perspective, it's like you have parts that have been, beaten and locked in the basement for 30 years. Of
Mhm,
of course, they are desperate for this work and this healing, right? And this unburdening. And so on one hand, um, sometimes the work can naturally go pretty quick, and you go into someone's system and their protectors are softened or permissive or kind of letting us go in and do the work or letting us go right there to an exile. And there might
mhm,
be a beautiful unburdening that happens in the first session or the third session or whenever. On the other hand, that's not what most IFS work looks like, or I think should look like.
mhm,
I also have to say, I'm guilty of perpetuating this because of some of the demos I've done on this channel where people
mhm,
come in and we're doing an unburdening the first time I've ever met them.
mm,
I think something that has to do with is number one, people that have volunteered for these demos or that would volunteer for a demo like at a therapy training, like an IFS training, they're often therapists. They have a good sense of their parts. They've been doing healing work for decades already. They have a great degree of self energy. They know the model and they've read No Bad Parts or they've read the books, they've listened to the podcast. And so they might come in and they're kind of on the fast track to an unburdening.
Mhm.
And unburdening is by no means like the goal of IFS, but it is, in my opinion, one of the most potent aspects of the model. So that's the part that people seem to like see a lot and think, well, that's IFS, and that's kind of the goal is to get parts unburdened. Um, what I would say is for folks that are newer to the model is just that again, just go slower than you think you should, and check meticulously with protectors every step of the way. Even if you've checked, check again. Right before you're about to do an unburdening, check again. Right as you meet an exile, check again with any protector parts and have the client just ask inside. Ask, are there any parts that have issue or concerns or fears about what we're doing here, getting to know this little one?
Mhm.
That's another way to keep the work safe. Um,
Yeah.
Beyond that, we have to go slow so we can integrate the work. So if there is a really nice unburdening that happens, we have to follow up with that part and keep coming back to it and make sure that the part is still unburdened or and that it didn't snap back to that stuck frozen place it was in or back to that abusive situation that we found it in. So yeah, going slow is key, right? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Yeah,
I
I like
forget who said
that.
that, but yeah.
And when I think about, how long we have to do an IFS session, which is about 60 minutes, right? Um, and sometimes when I talk to clients and they're willing to see what an IFS session is about, I let them know, please let me know as soon as you walk in here, that's what you want to do. So we have enough
Great.
time because sometimes the part, needs more time. And
That's right.
60 minutes sometimes is not enough. I've had to go a little bit over a few times, but it's something that I try not to do because of, next clients. So we want to be respectful of that. But um, I think getting to know the clients, that's usually what I do. I don't feel comfortable talking about IFS the first time I see a client or even the second. I usually offer for clients that I have been seeing for a while that I know a little bit about, and that I know would benefit from IFS.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. And the managing the clock is actually something really important to talk about. And it's the same with EMDR. If you're
Right.
looking at the clock and you've got 10 minutes left, and let's say you're pretty deep working with a part, let's say it is an exile, and maybe you've even naturally started the unburdening process, or you're starting to have the client's self go in and witness this part
Mm-hmm.
in their stuckness or in the moment that the abuse happened or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have to really be diligent and be looking at the clock and thinking, okay, what's realistic to get done in the next 10 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if you've already started, excuse me, started that process of unburdening, you might just want to slow down and have the client see what it's like to just keep being with this part today, right?
Mm-hmm.
The being with is a very potent aspect of the model and is probably overlooked because we're often so eager to just like get to the good stuff or get to these epic
Yeah.
unburnings. What's it like just to meet this part and be in the same room as them today? Again,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's an exile and especially if your client has a trauma history. Can you just hang out in that same room or on the other side of the room or sit on the edge of the bed with that part and just see what it's like to be together?
Yeah.
That could be all the part needs in order to unburden. That could be the unburdening for all we
Wow.
know. So I think in a lot of ways, less is more. And we go really slow and we just kind of take what the system is giving us. If the
Yeah.
whole thing is about unmet needs, right? And again, therapists know a lot about unmet needs, they know a lot about attachment. Use
Mm-hmm.
this information to think about how you're kind of going about this work, right? For a
Yeah.
lot of therapists who are also parents, you have an idea of what a little kid needs when they're
Mhm.
terrified, when they've been bullied, right? When they are sick. So if you can embody that energy and help the client embody that energy, to me, that's really also like the core of the model.
Right. Well, I love that. I think there is a part of me that feels a little bit relieved. Um, I think what I'm hearing you say is that we don't necessarily, depending on the client, depending on what's happening in the session, right? We don't necessarily need to do the step by step and do the,
Right.
but sometimes just the client being there with the part, can be enough for that day. And then
Yeah.
another session you would continue. Is that what you would do?
That might be a good way to tie the sessions together is to start, hey, last session we left off with this little one. He was in the
Mm-hmm.
room and he was sitting on his bed and you were sitting on the foot of the bed. Um, what would it be like to go and just check in with that part as a starting point? Does that feel right?
Mm-hmm.
And we can see how that goes, right? And the part
Right.
might still be there. He might still be really scared. Or maybe the client says, I've been checking in with him every day and he's actually better now. Or he left that
Mm-hmm.
room and he went outside to play and I went with him. And he changed his clothes and he looks happy now. He's smiling now. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. Can you be there with him as he's outside and smiling and see what else he might need? Um,
Right.
the good thing about this whole model is if the client has enough self energy, you can and should default to the client, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rather than the therapist having to constantly know what to do or what question to ask next or where to go with the protocol itself,
Mm-hmm.
when the client has sufficient self energy, you can ask the client, check in and see if you get a sense of where to go from here, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's the start of the session or you're halfway through the session, or let's say the session gets stalled out and you get really stuck and you've got a really angry, pissed off protector and you've got an exile and you've
Yeah.
got a critical part over here and an addictive part over here and they're all in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You can just default to the client if they have enough self energy. See if you can just slow down and get a sense for what needs to happen here. And the client
Mm-hmm.
will go, okay, let me check. And they'll go, actually, I need to turn and work with the pissed off protector one. Okay, so go ahead and do that. And some options for doing that would be you can work with it right here with the others watching. You could bring the protector to another room, and the others might watch from another room or through a monitor or whatever it might be. You can ask the pissed off protector what it wants to do and give it
Mm-hmm.
some of that attention in the way that it wants right now.
Right.
So that's a beautiful thing. It takes a lot of pressure off the therapist to always be knowing what to do next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I keep going with questions?
Yeah, what else would be helpful? We got maybe like 5 more minutes left. Let me know what else is coming to mind.
Okay. So I think I really would like to ask this question. Have you encountered situations where clients think it's weird, the idea of talking to a part, and that kind of like collides with their faith, thinking, oh, this is not aligned with, my faith, with my religious views. Have you encountered that, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. The first thing I would say is I offer everything to my clients with an open hand, meaning this is just an idea or just something I'm offering today, whether it's doing a
Right.
meditation or um, back when I used to do clinical hypnosis. It's like that's just a thing I'm offering with an open hand and
Yeah.
let them get a sense of is that a yes or a no
Mhm.
intuitively for them.
Like, does that
So
feel right for me?
does that feel right for me?
Mhm.
In terms of getting to know your parts, I think it is weird. I think the whole thing is weird and bizarre when you realize, oh my goodness, these things talk back,
Right.
right? Right? Or they're always like, barking down, breathing down my neck, and I can turn
Right.
and talk to it and actually have a dialogue with it that is
Mhm.
two-way, like two people talking to each other, or the fact that I am multiple, right? And
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily make me crazy or mean I have dissociative identity disorder, or whatever. So I just use humor and levity in my work and offer that I know this might sound kind of strange, but could you turn and talk to it? Could you
Mhm.
ask it how old it is? And I know this sounds weird. Could you ask it how old it thinks you are? But just see if you get anything. I don't know if you'll get anything. Go ahead and ask. And
Right.
the client goes, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna do this thing because my therapist is asking me. And they go,
Hmm.
oh well, he's 7, and he's saying he also thinks I'm 7. Oh, okay, interesting.
Hmm.
Go ahead and let him know that you're not 7, right? Let him know that you're 34.
Hmm.
Show him that you're 34. Let him see you physically and take you in.
Right.
What's that like for the two of you? Oh, he's surprised. Oh, he's a little relieved. Okay, yeah, just hang out there with him being relieved and surprised, right? So the best way to get conviction about the model is to experience it, right? Whether you're a therapist or a client, and just be communing with your own parts and see how that is.
Hmm.
Going to your question around faith, um, on one hand, a lot of times we introduce the model by talking about parts. I think perhaps a better introduction is talking about self and self energy. And I did an episode recently on this where I just kind of shared some additional offerings in terms of expanding our definition of self energy. But I would invite the client to create their own definition of self or self energy. And if that means pulling in their faith and pulling in their experience of God, or
Yeah.
thinking about self as the God image inside of me, thinking about self or self energy as love. If we think, well, the whole model is basically love, and inside me at my core is my heart that is in its deepest nature true and wise and full of love, then basically all the model is bringing love to the pissed off parts of me and the hurt, scared
Mhm.
parts of me.
Yeah.
And is that an idea clients can get on board with and loop that into their faith background? I have clients that are Christian. I have clients that are Muslim. I just invite them to make it work for their worldview, and also to reject it if it doesn't make sense or it
Yeah.
feels sacrilegious. Again, we're always just defaulting to the client and coming in to someone's system with humility.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I have a similar approach to that. I always ask clients, does it make sense to you? Does it feel right for
Right.
you? Because that's not the only route for us to go, right?
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
continue the route that we're going, or if you're seeking something more specific like EMDR, I can refer you out, but we don't have to go this route. But
That's right.
usually 99% of the time, people will say, I'm curious about it, right? And then
That's
they
right.
end up really loving the model.
That's
And
right.
I think one thing that I love about IFS is this idea that I usually joke, I can blame the part, right? So there is a part of me that feels a certain way. And I think clients, sometimes when they start saying, I am this, I'm that, and I help them by perhaps rephrasing that and saying, there is a part of me that feels this way, right? And it's just like, yes, it's a part, it's not me. And
Yeah.
the part has its reasons to feel what it feels and to act the way it's acting. And I
Yeah.
think that brings so much more self compassion to sessions and to people's everyday lives.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the paradigm shift, right? Is that parts get into polarized roles because of polarizing experiences, aka traumas, in one's
Right.
life. And so the stance of IFS in itself is de-shaming, right? It's a part of you that likes to drink, right? What could
Mhm.
be good about drinking? Can you ask that part? What could be good about drinking? What could be good about continuing to drink? What could be scary about not drinking? And really just let that part have the microphone. It's a beautiful way to create space in someone's system and to de-shame. Um,
Mhm.
Going back to this aspect of just offering things to the client of see if this feels right. A core marker of trauma for most people is people bypassed their intuition in the trauma, right? At some point, they might have had a thought of this is not safe, or this person is not safe, or this situation is not safe, or
Right.
this person is not being kind to me, whatever, but I'm going to suck it up and just do it anyway, or
Mhm.
stay in a partnership with this person, right? Even though they're hurting me. So
Right.
if part of how they got here is bypassing their intuition, the risk is they do that again in therapy, right? And therapists, in our power and in this chair that we sit in that has a ton of power inherently, that is a constant risk, even with IFS, is that clients end up bypassing their intuition because of wanting to be a good client and wanting to be compliant and going, yeah, I'll do this parts thing. Yeah, sure. Oh, I'll get to know the 7-year-old, even though inside they have parts that are going, no, 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 this is a horrible idea, right? Because you're going to dissociate, you're going to feel flooded, you might relapse, right? I'm going to start cutting myself again. And the therapist is going, yeah, just get to know that part. Yeah, go help that little boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can have our self-like parts that come in with an agenda and want to really push this stuff on our clients because we so want to help and because it's so hard to see people suffering, right? And see people really traumatized and stuck. And at the same time, if we lead the client to bypass their intuition again, the work is re-traumatizing. So it's just a word of caution for all of us
Yeah,
to keep that in mind.
absolutely. Wow,
Yeah.
it's been great. So much good, amazing information. I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you for doing this. This was a treat for me, and I'm sure people can tell I'm so passionate about the work and the model,
Yeah,
passionate about trauma and about this model and what it can do for people. So, um, thank you, yeah, for doing this and bringing such great questions. I hope it was helpful and love to do it again sometime.
yeah, no, it was very, very helpful. You got a lot of my questions answered. I really appreciate the work you do on the podcast. Please keep doing it. I'm always listening to it and learning so much. Everything that I've been learning from your podcast has been helped me personally, but mainly professionally. And thank you because you were the one who introduced IFS to me, you know. So keep doing great work. It's certainly been helping a lot of folks out there.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful, and it is so great to like, yeah, meet a listener and see that the work is helping some people. So
Mhm.
that's kind of all I need in order to keep going and keep
Yeah,
doing this work. So thank you for that, and thanks again for doing this.
thank you.
All right, keep in touch. Thanks for listening to another episode of Going Inside. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching, and share your favorite episode with a friend. You can follow me on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at John Clark Therapy, and apply to work with me one-on-one at johnclarktherapy.com. See you next time.